The Arizona sun was a hammer on the back of her neck. Ellie kept her eyes on the dusty trail ahead, one foot in front of the other, trying to ignore the man walking several paces behind her. Her husband, David, was on his phone again, his face pinched with frustration. "Still no service," he muttered, not for the first time. This was a stupid idea. The idea, 2 days ago, had been his. A weekend hiking trip to reconnect, he'd said, to get away from the noise. But the noise, Ellie realized, was inside him. The silence between them now was thick and heavy, worse than the desert heat. She missed the man she'd married, the one who used to make her laugh. This version was just impatient, always looking for the next thing, never present in the now. She paused to take a sip from her water bottle, looking out at the sea of rust-colored rocks and prickly cacti. It was harsh, but beautiful in its own way. "It's kind of amazing out here, don't you think?" she said, trying to bridge the gap. David didn't look up. "It's a lot of dirt. And it's hot. We should have stayed at the resort." Ellie's heart sank a little. She turned to keep walking, her hiking boots scuffing against a loose stone. That's when she heard a sudden, sharp buzzing sound, like a rattler shaken fast and angry. It came from a cluster of rocks right beside the narrow path. Her body froze before her mind could understand. The strike was a blur of movement. A pain, hot and immediate, pierced through her hiking pants and into the flesh of her calf. She cried out, stumbling back, her eyes wide with terror, as she saw the diamond-backed rattlesnake slither quickly away into the shadows. David. He was by her side in an instant, his phone forgotten. "What happened? Did it get you?" "It bit me. Right here." Ellie's voice was already trembling. She lowered herself to the ground, her hands shaking as she rolled up her pant leg. 2 small puncture wounds were already visible, and a burning sensation was spreading up her leg. Panic flashed in David's eyes. He looked from her leg to the empty trail ahead, then back to the way they'd come. His calculations were almost visible on his face, the distance, the heat, her weight. Okay, he said, but his voice was high and thin. "We need to get you help." He helped her scoot over to a large, flat rock in a sliver of shade. He gave her his water bottle and their only backpack. "You need to stay still. Slow your heart rate. I'm going to run back to the truck. I can get there faster alone. I'll bring the park rangers back with the jeep." It made a terrible, logical sense. Ellie, her head already starting to feel swimmy, nodded. "Just hurry. Please hurry." He stood up, brushing the dust from his knees. For a second, he looked at her. There was a strange look in his eyes she couldn't quite read. It wasn't just fear. It was something else, something that made her feel cold despite the heat. "I'll be quick," he said. Then he turned and started jogging back down the trail, his figure getting smaller and smaller until he disappeared around a bend. The first hour was pure fear. Every minute felt like an hour. Ellie focused on her breathing, trying to stay calm. Her calf was swelling, the skin tight and hot. The pain was a deep, throbbing ache. She sipped the water, trying to make it last. The second hour, the fear began to mix with a dull confusion. The sun moved across the sky. The shade from her rock shrank. Shouldn't he have reached the truck by now? Even walking, he should have been back with help by now. Or at least she'd hear the sound of an engine dot by the 3rd hour. As the afternoon started to fade into a golden, chilly evening, the confusion hardened into a sickening realization. The buzzing in her ears wasn't just from the venom. It was the deafening sound of betrayal. He had taken the map. She knew he always kept it in his pocket. He had taken the small emergency GPS beacon they'd bought together. She rummaged through the backpack he'd left her with. It had only the water, a half-eaten protein bar, and a light jacket. No first aid kit. No flashlight. He hadn't just gone for help. He had left her. He had seen the snakebite, seen the remote location, and made a choice. A choice to walk away and let the desert do what it would. Tears finally came then, hot and silent. They weren't from the pain in her leg, which was now afire all the way up to her thigh. They were from the crushing weight of being thrown away. The man who had promised to love her in sickness and in health had seen sickness and seen only a burden. The cold of the desert night began to creep into her bones, and with it a deeper cold settled in her heart. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The sky darkened, the first stars appearing, pitiless and bright. She pulled the thin jacket around her shoulders, shivering, wondering if these would be the last stars she would ever see. The cold was a living thing. It crept through Ellie's thin jacket and bit deep into her bones. The fiery pain in her leg had settled into a heavy, sick throbbing that matched the slow, weak beat of her heart. She drifted in and out of a strange, fuzzy consciousness. One moment she was staring at a bright star, thinking it looked like a hole punched in the dark sky. The next, she was lost in a confused dream of her own wedding day, the smiling face of her husband melting like wax under a hot sun. Her mouth was a dry cave. The water was gone. She knew she should stay still, but a deeper animal need was taking over. She had to find water. Using her arms and her one good leg, she began to crawl. It was a slow, agonizing process. Every movement sent jagged sparks of pain up her side. She dragged herself over sharp rocks and through dry brush, her hands getting scratched and raw. She didn't get far. Exhaustion took her completely under just a few yards from the trail, behind a skeletal mesquite tree. Her head slumped onto her arms. The world faded to black dot **** miles away. In the first pale light of dawn, a man named Levi was already at work. His old truck bounced along a dirt road that marked the edge of his family's ranch. It was a quiet, struggling piece of land, and he preferred it that way. The quiet meant he didn't have to think, didn't have to remember. He just had to work. His hands, rough and scarred from years of labor, gripped the wheel. His eyes, a quiet blue the color of a winter sky, scanned the horizon out of habit, checking for breaks in the fence line, for cattle that might have wandered. That's when he saw them. The dark, slow circles in the sky, high up over a distant ridge on the state land that bordered his property. Buzzards, more than a few. They weren't the quick, diving circles of birds spotting a small rabbit or a dead coyote. This was the patient, waiting circle of birds who knew something bigger was down there. Something that wasn't moving. Levi's jaw tightened. It was probably a deer. Maybe an old cow that had gotten lost. Still, a knot of unease settled in his stomach. He was a practical man, not a superstitious one, but years of living on the land had taught him to trust his gut. His gut told him to go look. He turned the truck off the road, heading cross-country over the rough scrubland. The truck groaned in protest, but it kept going. He drove for 20 minutes, the circle of birds getting closer and clearer. When the land became too rough for the truck, he stopped, grabbed his worn leather satchel, and got out. He walked the rest of the way, his boots kicking up little clouds of dust. He found her not on the trail, but just off it, curled like a fallen leaf. For a second, he thought he was too late. She was so still. Then he saw the slight, ragged rise and fall of her shoulders. He moved quickly, kneeling in the dirt beside her. Her face was pale, streaked with dirt and dried tears. Her lips were cracked. One leg of her hiking pants was stretched tight over a badly swollen calf. He didn't need to be a doctor to know what had happened. Snakebite. And from the looks of her, it had happened many, many hours ago. "Hey," he said, his voice low and gravelly from lack of use. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. A low moan escaped her lips. "Okay," he said, more to himself than to her. "Okay, just hold on." He was a man of action, not panic. He pulled a canteen of water from his satchel, gently tilting her head to wet her lips. She choked a little, then drank greedily, a small bit of life flickering back into her eyes. He didn't try to move the leg. Instead, he took a bandana from his pocket and fashioned a loose band above the worst of the swelling. Not a tight tourniquet, but something to slow the spread just a little. Then he reached for the most important thing he owned. It was an old, bulky satellite phone. He'd bought it after a terrible loss years ago, a silent promise to himself to never be too cut off to call for help again. His big, calloused fingers struggled with the small buttons for a moment before he got a connection to the county sheriff's office. "This is Levi Callahan," he said, his voice steady. "I'm on the east ridge of the state land, near my fence line. I've found a woman. Alive, but in bad shape. Snakebite. Needs a medical helicopter now." He gave the best coordinates he could. The voice on the other end said they'd scramble a chopper from the regional hospital. It would take time. Levi put the phone away and turned his full attention back to the woman. Her eyes were open now, wide with fear and confusion. She was trying to speak. He left, she whispered, the words tearing at her throat. He said, "Help." "Don't try to talk," Levi said. He kept his voice calm. "Help is coming. You just need to stay awake for me. Look at me. Keep your eyes open." He sat in the dirt beside her, his back against the mesquite tree. He talked to her, not about anything important. He talked about the weather, about how the winter had been dry, about his old truck that wouldn't start on cold mornings. It was a quiet, steady stream of words, a lifeline to pull her back from the dark place she was slipping into. He made her sip more water. He watched the sky. When the distant thump, thump, thump of the helicopter finally broke the morning silence, it was the sweetest sound he'd ever heard. As the wind from the blades whipped up a storm of dust and leaves, the medical team jumped out and took over with quick, efficient movements. As they were loading her onto a stretcher, her hand reached out, blind and searching. Her fingers found his wrist and clutched it, cold and weak, but with a desperate strength. He didn't pull away. He just gave her hand a small, firm squeeze, a silent promise that she wasn't alone anymore. Then they lifted her into the helicopter, and the door slammed shut. The noise rose to a roar, and the machine lifted into the sky, growing smaller until it was just a speck, then gone. The sudden quiet felt heavy. Levi stood there for a long moment, the dust slowly settling around him. He looked down at his wrist, where her fingers had been. Then he turned and walked back to his truck, the circle of buzzards high above finally breaking apart, having found nothing to claim after all. The light in the hospital room was too bright. It was a clean, white, unnatural light that felt like it was shining right through Ellie's skin. It had been 3 days. 3 days of nurses checking her vital signs, of doctors explaining how the antivenin had stopped the damage, of her body slowly, painfully, fighting its way back. The pain in her leg was now a dull, manageable ache. But the pain in her chest, a cold, hollow feeling, was worse. It was the echo of that desert silence, the memory of those circling birds. Her husband, David, had shown up on the second day. He burst into the room with a bouquet of gas station flowers, his face a perfect mask of worry and relief. "Ellie!" "Oh my God, baby. I've been out of my mind." He went to hug her, but she stiffened, pulling back into the stiff pillows. His story poured out in a nervous rush. He'd run for the truck, he said, but he'd taken a wrong turn in his panic. He'd gotten lost, his phone useless. By the time he found the ranger station, it was dark, and they told him a search would have to wait for first light. He'd been frantic, he insisted. He'd been crying. She listened, staring at the 4 line in her arm. His words sounded like lines from a bad movie. They didn't match the look in his eyes she remembered in that last moment, that cold, calculating look. "You took the map," she said, her voice flat. "You took the GPS beacon." He blinked, the performance faltering for just a second. I must have grabbed them without thinking. I was in shock, Ellie. My only thought was to run for help as fast as I could. Later that day, a park ranger and a sheriff's deputy came to see her. They were kind but serious. They asked her to tell her story, every detail, from the hike to the bite to watching him disappear. They listened, taking careful notes. Then the deputy said something that made the cold hollow in her chest turn to ice. "Ma'am, when we located your husband at the motel near the park entrance, we did a routine search of his vehicle and his belongings. We found the map and the beacon. That's correct. We also recovered his phone." He paused, choosing his words. "On that phone, we found text messages sent to a friend the week before your trip. They were concerning. They talked about life insurance, about being stuck. They've been deleted, but our tech people recovered them. David was arrested right there in the hospital lobby. His shouts of protest, his cries of it being a misunderstanding, faded down the hallway. Ellie just stared at the ceiling, feeling nothing at all. The betrayal was now a legal fact, written down in a police report. The man she'd married had not just left her. He had planned to. The next morning, a different visitor came. She heard a soft knock on the open door and turned her head. It was the cowboy from the desert. He looked uncomfortable, filling the doorway in his worn jeans and a clean but faded shirt. He held a small, simple bunch of wildflowers, yellow desert blooms, and a few sprigs of purple sage. They were nothing like the bright, perfect flowers David had brought. "Oh," Ellie said, pushing herself up a little. "Hello, ma'am," he said with a small nod. He didn't come all the way in, just stood at the threshold, as if respecting a fence line. "Just wanted to see you were upright." "I am," she said. "Thanks to you?" She meant it more than he could possibly know. He gave another nod, a little awkward. He looked around the room, at the machines, at the sterile walls, then back at her. "They treating you all right here?" "They are." A long silence stretched between them. It wasn't the heavy, painful silence she'd had with David. This was just quiet. The man wasn't trying to fill it with lies or excuses. "I'm Levi," he finally said. "Ellie." He nodded, as if filing the name away. His eyes, that quiet winter sky blue, met hers. There was no pity in them, just a steady, solid sort of seeing. He saw her broken, abandoned, lying in a hospital gown, and he didn't look away. "The land? It can be cruel," he said slowly, his voice low. "But it wasn't the land that hurt you." His simple words cut through the fog in her mind more sharply than anything the doctors or police had said. He was right. The snake was just a snake. The desert was just a desert. The real poison had been walking beside her. Levi shifted his weight. "Well, I'll let you rest." He stepped forward, not to hug her or even shake her hand, but to place the little bunch of wildflowers carefully on the bedside table next to the plastic water pitcher. They smelled of sun and dry earth. "Thank you," she whispered again. "Take care, Ellie," he said. And then he was gone, his boots making a soft sound on the linoleum floor. She looked at the flowers. They were already a little wilted, imperfect, real, just like his brief, quiet visit. It was the first genuine thing that had happened to her in a long time. Later, alone again, the full weight of her situation crashed down. She had no home to go to. Her house was with David, and she would never set foot in it again. Her family was far away. Her friends were tied to their old life as a couple. She had savings, but not enough to start over somewhere new. She felt untethered, floating in this white room, with nothing and no one to anchor her. Her eyes drifted back to the wildflowers. She thought of Levi's steady hands, his calm voice telling her to stay awake. She thought of the vast, quiet land she had seen from his truck window as the helicopter flew away. A place that had almost killed her, but where one man had chosen to stop and help dot an idea, fragile and terrifying, began to form in the back of her mind. It was crazy. It was probably stupid. But it was the only thing that didn't fill her with dread. She reached for the phone by her bed, not to call anyone, but to use the internet. Her fingers, still weak, typed slowly. Callahan Ranch. She needed to know where it was. She needed to know if the quiet she remembered there was real, or just a dream she'd had while dying. The old pickup truck rattled and groaned as it turned off the paved county road and onto a long, dusty driveway. Ellie gripped the door handle, not from fear of the rough ride, but from the sheer, terrifying weight of what she was doing. In the passenger seat beside her was a single, worn suitcase. It held everything she owned now. The drive from the hospital had been long and quiet. She'd gotten the address from an old website listing for Callahan Ranch. She didn't call. What would she have said? The two-story farmhouse came into view, its white paint peeling, but the wide porch looked sturdy. Beyond it, she could see a red barn, some fenced pastures, and the endless stretch of tan and green land leading to the distant mountains. It was exactly as she remembered it from her few blurred seconds of consciousness before the helicopter took her away. Harsh but honest Levi was by the barn, fixing a hinge on a heavy wooden gate. He saw the unfamiliar truck and straightened up, his eyes narrowing against the sun. When Ellie opened the door and slowly got out, one leg still a little stiff, his expression shifted from curiosity to pure, unguarded surprise. "Ellie?" he said, wiping his hands on his jeans as he walked over. "Hello." "Levi," she said, her voice sounding small in the wide open space. He stopped a few feet away, looking from her face to the suitcase and back again. He didn't say anything, just waited. It was a habit of his, she was starting to understand. He let the silence speak first. She took a deep breath. "I was wondering. I need a place to stay. Just for a little while. And I need work." The words tumbled out, rehearsed on the long drive. "I can't pay rent yet, but I can work for it. I can cook, I can clean. I can learn to do other things. I'm a hard worker, I can't go back to where I was." She braced herself for questions, for pity, for a polite refusal. Levi studied her face. He saw the dark circles under her eyes that no amount of hospital sleep had cured. He saw the set of her jaw, tight with a determination that was fighting against utter exhaustion. He looked past her at the empty driveway, confirming she was truly alone. "The guest room small," he said finally, his voice gravelly. "And the roof in the kitchen leaks when it rains hard." It wasn't a yes. It wasn't a no. It was a statement of fact. "I don't mind small," Ellie said. "And I can put a bucket under a leak." A faint, almost invisible hint of something softened around his eyes. It wasn't a smile, not quite. He gave a single, short nod. "All right then." That was it. He picked up her suitcase like it weighed nothing and led her inside. The house was simple and warm, but clean. The guest room was indeed small, with an end-frame bed and a window looking out toward the barn. It was perfect. For the first time in weeks, Ellie felt a knot in her shoulders begin to loosen. She was not a guest here. She was here to work. The next morning, she started at dawn. She made coffee, strong and hot. She found eggs in the fridge and made breakfast. Levi ate it with a quiet "thank you," and then headed out to the barn. Ellie washed the dishes and found a broom and started sweeping floors that clearly hadn't been swept in a while. She was not asked to do these things. She just did them. It felt good to use her hands, to have a simple, clear task dot in the afternoon. She ventured out to the barn. Levi was mucking out stalls. The smell of hay and animals was sharp, but not unpleasant. "Can I help?" she asked. He leaned on his pitchfork. "You sure? It's dirty work." "I'm already dirty," she said, and it was true. Dust from the house cleaning was on her clothes. He showed her how to use the pitchfork, how to toss the old, wet hay into the wheelbarrow and spread the fresh, clean stuff. It was hard, physical labor. Her muscles, weakened from her ordeal, burned and shook. But she kept going. Sweat soaked through her shirt, and for a while it washed away the thoughts in her head. There was only the job in front of her that days fell into a rhythm. Up before the sun, coffee, feeding the few old chickens, making breakfast. Then the work mending fences with Levi, learning to groom the 2 old, gentle horses he kept, fixing the sagging screen door on the porch. They worked side by side for hours, often without speaking. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was filled with the sound of hammering, the creak of a pump handle, the distant cry of a hawk. One evening, after a long day repairing a water trough, they sat on the porch steps watching the sunset paint the sky in oranges and purples. Ellie's body ached, but it was a good ache. "This ranch," she said softly, breaking their comfortable quiet. "It's just you?" Levi was quiet for a long moment, watching the last of the light fade. "It was my family's, my wife. She passed 5 years back, illness." He said the words plainly, the pain worn smooth like a river stone over time. After that, it was hard to keep up with it all. Sold off most of the cattle. It's just me and the ghosts now. Ellie's heart ached for him. She understood ghosts. "It's a good place," she said. "It feels steady." He nodded. "It is that." Was thinking. Before she got sick, we always talked about using the place for more. Maybe helping. She loved horses. Thought about taking in ones that were mistreated or old, giving them a quiet field to live out their days. He shook his head slightly, as if shaking off a memory. Just talk, though. It wasn't just talk to Ellie. For the first time since the desert, she felt a spark that wasn't just about survival. It was about an idea. She didn't say anything, but she tucked the thought away, like a seed planted in dark soil. Weeks turned into a month. Ellie's strength returned, her skin tanning from the sun, her hands growing calloused. She stopped dreaming of the circling buzzards and started dreaming of blueprints and horse pastures. One day, a check arrived in the mail from her lawyer. A settlement from untangling her life from David's. It was money she'd never wanted. Stained with betrayal. That night at dinner, a simple meal of stew she'd made. She placed the check on the worn kitchen table between them. Levi looked at it, then at her, confused. "That man's money bought me nothing but pain," Ellie said, her voice clear. "I don't want it for a new life somewhere else. I want to use it here, for that idea you had, for the horses, for the ranch." Levi stared at the check, a storm of emotions in his quiet eyes, shock, refusal, and then a slow-dawning, fragile hope. "Ellie, this is your fresh start. You can't just—" "This is my fresh start," she interrupted, firm. "This is me choosing what to build. Not running from something, but building towards something. With someone I trust." The word trust hung in the air between them, big and important. Levi looked at her, really looked at her, not as the broken woman he'd found in the desert, but as the strong, determined person sitting across from him now. He saw a partner. He didn't thank her. He simply gave that familiar, solid nod. "All right, then," he said. "We'll build it." And for the first time, she saw a real, full smile touch his eyes. It changed his whole face. It felt like the sunrise after the longest, coldest night. The money changed everything, but not in the way most people would think. It didn't buy fancy things. It bought lumber and nails and bags of feed. It paid a local welder to fix the rusty old corrals. It turned an idea, whispered on a porch at sunset, into something real. Ellie and Levi became a team. They pored over old notebooks where his wife had sketched ideas for paddocks. They visited a rescue organization 3 counties over and came back with their first 2 horses, not young. Beautiful show animals, but older creatures with gentle eyes and stories written in their swayed backs and scars. One was a draft horse named Gus, who was simply too old for farm work. The other, a nervous Marais named Daisy, who had been mistreated and needed a quiet place to remember that people could be kind. Levi knew horses, but Ellie had a gift with them. She had a patience born from her own recovery. She would sit for hours on the fence of Daisy's paddock, just talking softly, letting the Marais get used to her presence. She didn't force anything. She just waited. And one afternoon, Daisy walked over and rested her great. Soft nose on Ellie's shoulder, and they both stood there, breathing together. The first time, a small group from a veterans center came to the ranch. Both Ellie and Levi were nervous. The idea was simple. Just let people be around the animals. No pressure to ride, just to brush, to feed, to exist in the quiet rhythm of the barn. Levi hung back, letting Ellie lead. He watched as a man with a tired face and distant eyes slowly relaxed while brushing Gus's thick coat. He saw Ellie hand a little girl a carrot to feed to Daisy, and the girl's shy smile was brighter than the Arizona sun. Levi felt a piece of his own heart, frozen for so long, crack and thaw just a little. The ranch was no longer a place that was slowly fading. It was alive. It had a purpose. And with that purpose, something between Ellie and Levi began to shift and grow. It wasn't a dramatic thing. It was in the way he'd have a fresh cup of coffee ready for her when she came in from the morning chores. It was in the way she'd mend a tear in his work shirt without being asked. It was the quiet comfort of sharing a long day's fatigue, sitting together on the porch as the stars came out, not needing to fill the space with words because the understanding was already there out one evening. Almost a year to the day since she'd arrived with her single suitcase. They were checking on a pregnant Marais in the barn. The air was sweet with hay, and the only sounds were the soft crunching of the animals and the distant cry of a coyote. Ellie was stroking the Marais' neck, whispering encouragement. "She's going to be a good mother," Ellie said softly. Levi stood beside her, watching her work. The lantern light cast a warm glow on her face. He saw the strength in her hands, the peace in her eyes, a peace that had been hard won. "Ellie," he said, his voice low in the quiet barn. She turned to look at him. He wasn't a man of pretty speeches. The words came out slow and plain, dug up from a deep, well-protected place inside him. "When I found you out there, I thought I was just saving a life. I didn't know. I didn't know you were going to come here and save everything else." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "You saved this old ranch from turning to dust. You made that dream we talked about real. You brought life back to this quiet land." He took a small step closer. "And you brought life back to me. I was just existing before you came. Now I'm living again." He reached out, not to pull her close, but to take her hand in his. His palm was rough and strong and warm. "I love you, Ellie, not because you needed saving, but because of the person you are. The strong, kind, stubborn woman who builds things up instead of tearing them down." Tears filled Ellie's eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness or pain. They were tears of recognition. This was what real love felt like. It wasn't a flash of lightning. It was the slow, steady warmth of the sun after a long winter. It was built on shared sweat, on mutual respect, on proven loyalty. It was a partnership, deep and true. She squeezed his hand, the feeling of his calloused skin against hers more real than any diamond ring. "I love you too, Levi," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You saw me, really saw me, when I was broken. And you gave me the space and the trust to put myself back together." She looked around the barn, at the horses, at the home they had built together from the ashes of their old lives. "You didn't just find me in the desert. You gave me a whole new world." He brought her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. It was a simple gesture, but it held a lifetime of promise. Later, they walked back to the house, hand in hand, under a sky dusted with a million stars. The story of the woman left for dead in the desert didn't end with a rescue. It didn't even end with a courtroom where her ex-husband was convicted and sent away. That was just the closing of an old, painful book. Her real story began with a lonely cowboy who stopped his truck because of a circle of birds. It began with a choice to stay, to work, to build. It was a story written not in ink, but in fence posts set deep into the earth, in the trust of a once frightened horse, in the quiet laughter that now echoed from the farmhouse porch. The snakebite had been ending, a brutal full stop. But Levi had offered her a comma, a chance to pause, and then continue. And together they had written a new sentence, a new paragraph, a whole new chapter of a life that was more beautiful and solid than anything Ellie could have imagined before. It was a love as vast and enduring as the desert sky, and a future as hopeful as the dawn breaking over their own piece of saved and saving land.